August 1988. 9-year-old Delphine Boulet went with her brother Nicolas to a scout camp near Deauville, France. Nicolas had spent 2 consecutive summers at this secluded camp set in a picturesque location and had always had a wonderful time. This time, his younger sister joined him, but the last week of the summer holidays, which was supposed to be filled with joy and laughter, turned into a nightmare. One night, while she was supposed to be sleeping peacefully in her tent, Delphine vanished without a trace. The camp proved to be far less safe than the children's parents had believed, and if not for a twist of fate, the nice guy with a gloomy look, as the kidnapper was described by his friends, would never have been caught, and the case would never have been solved. The Boulet family had always lived in the Paris region, in Issy-les-Moulineaux. Alain and Marie-Josée Boulet were raising 2 wonderful children, a son, Nicolas Boulet, and his younger sister, Delphine. Nicolas had been spending his summer holidays at a scout camp for 2 years in a row. In 1988, his younger sister, 9-year-old Delphine, went with him for the first time. The trip took place in August, during the last week of the holidays before the start of the new school year. Wanting to please their daughter, her parents decided to let her spend a week in nature at the camp. Like many parents, Alain and Marie-Josée felt a sense of anxiety about sending their children away for so long, but they were confident that the camp provided reliable supervision. However, they soon realized that this was not the case. Early on the morning of Saturday, August 27, 1988, the telephone rang in the Boulet family home. Alain answered the call. It was the director of the camp where his children were staying. He said, "Delphine is no longer at the camp." He repeated the phrase 2 or 3 times, but the father did not understand. The words simply would not register. It was a thought he refused to believe. What did it mean that his daughter was no longer at the camp? Where was she? When the director finally managed to make Alain understand that they could not find the girl, he immediately decided that he had to go there at once. The scout camp was located in Villerville, a small village a few kilometers from Deauville, right on the seashore. The village is famous for being one of the filming locations of the movie Monkey in Winter, based on the novel by Antoine Blondin and starring Jean Gabin and Jean-Paul Belmondo. Those familiar with this classic of French cinema will remember the scene in which the 2 protagonists end up behind the counter of the restaurant Le Cabaret Normand, located precisely in Villerville. The scout camp itself was set in the countryside, on elevated ground offering a magnificent view of the coastline. It consisted of 3 tents accommodating 20 to 25 children. Among them were only 2 girls, Delphine and her 10-year-old tentmate, Marlene. When Marlene woke up on Saturday morning, August 27th, she was surprised to find that Delphine was no longer there. She hurried to inform the camp leaders. The staff searched for Delphine, but since the tents were essentially in the middle of nowhere, there were no nearby places the girl could have gone on her own. They quickly realized they would not be able to find her by themselves. The child's disappearance was reported to her parents, and the emergency services were contacted. A large-scale search operation was launched. More than 200 gendarmes searched for Delphine, joined by firefighters and volunteers. They combed an area of several square kilometers. Helicopters, divers, and canine units were brought in. Not a single ditch, grove, field, or meadow was left unchecked. At that point, everyone believed that Delphine had left the camp on her own. Several facts seemed to support this theory. First, she had left wearing her shoes and had taken a flashlight with her. Second, the day before her disappearance, a small incident had occurred. Delphine had lost her scout patrol flag. She might have lost it near the old aquarium in the village of Trouville-sur-Mer, which the children had visited. The police therefore assumed that the girl might have gone there to look for it. Of course, this version was investigated, but it led nowhere. But even if the girl had decided to go somewhere on her own, that did not change the fact that such an undertaking was extremely dangerous for a child. This part of Normandy is very marshy and wooded, with largely sparsely populated areas. Not only was the terrain itself hazardous, but the girl could also have encountered wild animals or died from hunger or thirst. On the other hand, there were many farms and barns in the area where she might have found shelter, and as a scout she could, in theory, survive and even feed herself for several days. On one of the farms, an abandoned apple core was found, and for some reason, it was assumed that Delphine had left it there. As a result, after 3 days of searching, the police were convinced that the girl had left the camp on her own for some reason and was now afraid to return, fearing punishment. Delphine's parents could not sit idly by. Every day they rose at dawn and went to bed late in order to take part in the search for their daughter, putting up flyers asking anyone who might have seen her to come forward. Alain, the girl's father, told journalists that his daughter was quite strong and resilient for her age, loved walking, and could already have gone several kilometers. However, he did not truly believe that she could have run away. Like many children, she was shy, and running away from home did not fit her character at all. Delphine grew up in a very close-knit and loving family. She was close to her brother Nicolas. Delphine was a bright girl and a good student with many interests, particularly dancing. There were no problems at home or at school, and she had no reason to run away. Nevertheless, Alain did not rule out any theory that might explain his daughter's disappearance. He took a loudspeaker and began driving around the area. "Delphine, it's Daddy. Come out. You won't be punished. I'm begging you, my darling. Show yourself to your father," he repeated again and again. He drove for hours on end, pleading with his daughter to stop hiding. He clung to the hope that she had simply run away and was afraid to return, fearing she would be scolded. Because if it was not a runaway, then Delphine's fate could be far more terrible, and that was a thought he could not bear to entertain. But the more time passed, the more both the parents and the police began to consider that this might not be a runaway at all. The prosecutor opened a criminal investigation. On September 6th, about 20 kilometers from Villerville, a man who was picking mushrooms came across a partially charred body. The police who arrived at the scene confirmed that it was the body of a girl. It was in a horrific condition. It was clear that a flammable liquid had been poured over it to intensify the fire. Officers also found a rope that had been used to bind the victim. The girl had been struck several times with the back of her head against the rocky ground, and there were signs of asphyxiation. However, she had not been strangled by hands or a rope. It was more likely that the perpetrator had forced some kind of gag into her mouth. Because parents usually keep their child's first baby teeth after they fall out, one such tooth was compared with the burned body. Thanks to this milk tooth, the victim was identified as Delphine Boulet. Since she had first been struck on the head against the ground, investigators hoped that she was already dead when her body was set on fire and did not feel it. The experience of investigators in cases like this immediately suggested that they were dealing with a sexual assault followed by murder and an attempt to cover up the crime by setting a fire. Clearly, the case took a completely new turn, and after the discovery of the girl's body, the police began searching for her killer. Naturally, suspicion immediately fell on the camp staff. There were 5 of them in total, including the camp director. They behaved with dignity, understanding that the police were simply doing their job. Of course, they maintained their innocence and were soon released, as there was no evidence suggesting their involvement. Time passed, and the police had no new suspects. They questioned around 3,500 people, hoping that residents of the region might know something. They also examined the possible involvement of individuals who had previously been investigated or convicted in cases involving attacks on children. Unfortunately, it was a complete failure. The investigation did not move forward at all. The police feared that if the girl had been attacked by someone unknown to the family and with no prior record, finding him would be possible only by sheer luck. Incredibly, it was precisely such a stroke of luck that helped solve the case. The investigation stretched on for months. Thousands of questions and searches brought no answers. Yet every trace brought the authorities closer to the one behind the shadow. The picture of the crime slowly became clearer. A chance discovery, a letter, a confession, and the grim reality revealed itself to the investigators. Sometimes, the truth comes from the smallest, most unexpected details, and it can overturn everything you thought you... Autumn 1990 arrived. A restaurateur from Deauville, Remy Boivin, accidentally discovered a briefcase in an apartment he had provided for one of his employees. Inside were newspaper clippings about the tragedy that had occurred at the camp, many clippings. But most importantly, there was more than just that. In the briefcase lay a letter confessing to the murder of Delphine. The letter was addressed to the girl's mother, although she had, of course, never received such a message. The author wrote that he was driven towards sexual violence and the murder of girls. He said he had seen Delphine in town and that she had caught his attention. He wrote, She will be mine in 4 days. Later you will find her body. It will be cold, and the body will be completely naked. She will be assaulted and strangled. That is all. I wanted to warn you." The letter had been written by Remy's employee, a dishwasher at his restaurant, 29-year-old Gerard Labour. Gerard was immediately taken into custody. He did not resist. The man recounted in detail the murder of Delphine and the assault on her. Gerard explained that he had stumbled upon the children's camp completely by chance during a walk, and in his mind a plan for the crime immediately took shape. He bought gasoline at a Deauville gas station and stocked up on ropes, cotton for a gag, and sheets. Then, on August 26th, he hid in a cornfield where he spent part of the night, showing remarkable patience. Eventually, he heard the characteristic sound of a tent zipper opening. He then spotted the child walking with a flashlight toward a nearby tree. Clearly, the girl had gone there to attend to a natural need. Leaving the cornfield, Gerard followed the girl, grabbed her from behind, gagged her with cotton, wrapped her in a sheet, placed her in his car, and drove to the edge of a small forest. It was there that he pulled Delphine from the car. Gerard tied the victim with ropes, assaulted her, and then struck the back of her head against the ground several times with force. He poured gasoline over the lifeless body, threw the can itself on top, and set it on fire, without bothering to remove the ropes that had bound her. He then fled the crime scene. It was a very detailed account. The detectives had no doubt that Gerard was telling the truth, as he knew specific details that the police had not shared with the press. Gerard Labour had never come to the attention of the police, although investigators later established that this was not because he had lived a blameless life. For years, his relatives noticed alarming behavior that pointed to severe psychological disturbances. These warning signs were known within the family, but no decisive action was taken. In 1984, 4 years before the events at the scout camp, Gerard was involved in a serious incident within his own family while alone with a young relative. The incident was concealed and no report was ever made to the authorities. Silence prevailed and responsibility was avoided. To her credit, Gerard's mother did not attempt to deny the severity of the situation. She insisted that her son be admitted to a psychiatric hospital where he underwent treatment. However, the intervention failed to prevent further harm. After his release, another grave incident occurred, once again involving a family member, and once again it remained hidden. Under different circumstances, these events should have led to legal consequences long before Delphine Boulet's disappearance. Instead, Gerard remained invisible to the justice system. Part of the reason lay in the environment he came from, a profoundly dysfunctional household marked by neglect, violence, and silence. There were 9 children in the family. The parents failed to provide safety, stability, or protection. One of the children later took her own life, and the family eventually disintegrated. Accountability was absent and suffering went unaddressed. By the age of 29, Gerard lived in isolation, unable to form normal relationships. At work, he appeared quiet and unremarkable. Colleagues described him as polite, reserved, and distant, someone who easily faded into the background. What no one saw was the inner world he carried with him. Over time, his thoughts grew darker, increasingly focused on domination and destruction. These obsessions were never confronted, never treated, and never stopped. When Delphine Boulet crossed his path, the trajectory that had been forming for years reached its tragic conclusion. On January 23, 1991, the police and the prosecutor's office conducted a reconstruction of the crime. Gerard agreed to take part in it. To make everything as accurate as possible, everyone approached the tree where Delphine had been killed, deep at night. The weather was very cold, but Gerard obediently and in detail showed how the crime had occurred. He acted out the scene of sexual assault. Then he set fire to a mannequin representing the victim. It was so realistic and horrifying that one of the gendarmes, who had served many years in the police, could not hide his tears. The trial began in May 1992. Gerard was tried both for the murder of Delphine and for what he had done to his niece and cousin. Despite his confession and participation in the crime reconstruction, Gerard declared that he was innocent. Throughout the trial, he kept his head down and did not look up. Even when Delphine's father, Alain Boulet, spoke, he stood up and, with incredible dignity and without shedding a single tear, spoke about his little daughter. He began with the words, "I dreamed of inviting Delphine to dance with me on her 18th birthday." His testimony made a powerful impression on the jurors. Equally compelling were the pieces of evidence against Gerard, including his letter, confession, and the reconstruction of the crime. There was no doubt about his guilt. The prosecutor demanded a life sentence for the defendant, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He added that 15 years earlier, he would have demanded the death penalty. The request was granted. This sentence is considered the maximum penalty in France. Gerard showed no reaction to the verdict. He was sent to prison, where he died at the age of 44. In Issy-les-Moulineaux, where the Boulay family lives, a garden was created in the name of Little Delphine. It was opened 15 years ago on September 26, 2010. At the entrance, a photograph of the little girl was installed. It shows her smiling, as she always did, before a man came into her life and took away her chance to grow up and live the life she might have chosen. Delphine's parents joined other families of missing and murdered children to create the Association of Parents of Victimized Children. This organization still exists today and supports more than 250 families across the country. But most importantly, it initiated the creation of a genetic database to track sexual offenders in France. The court delivered its verdict, yet a shadow lingered. The story left a deep mark on all who witnessed the investigation, a reminder of how darkness can quietly touch even the most ordinary lives. Delphine's memory lives on in gardens, in organizations, and in the vigilance that reminds us of the past. Yet one thing remains unchanged: human darkness can hide in the most ordinary places, and sometimes only the attention and courage of adults can stop it.